guys, welcome back to another episode of the Whiskey Diaries. My name is Martin Lang, and today we're going to be talking about a very interesting whiskey. Personally, I don't know any other distilleries that are doing this per se. Please make sure that if you do, put it in the comments and I'll have a look at it and we'll probably review it. So this is Nikka Coffey Malt whiskey. We'll go into what it is and why this is so interesting, but a little bit of history and a little bit of background on Nikka. We have done a few videos, you can definitely look them up. But Nikka basically started in 1934 with the first distillery being Yoichi Distillery in the north coast, in the South Island on the west coast, close to the ocean, created by a gentleman called Masataka Taketsuru. The gentleman himself did a apprenticeship in Scotland for about 10 years in Longmorn and then Hazelburn in Campbelltown. He brought all that knowledge. Basically, he started the Yamazaki distilleries, and about 2-3 years later, he started his own distillery in Yoichi, in the town of in the prefecture of Hokkaido. Now, Yoichi was very, very successful. After 6-7 years, they produced the first bottling, and then after that, in 1963, they opened another distillery that is called Miyagiku. Miyagiku was supposed to be 1.5 times, 1.5 times the size of Yoichi. Then eventually it got expanding to almost 3 times this size. In the 1970s, they added column distillations. Column distillations is a way of producing continuous distillation, continuous columns, is a way of producing whiskey continuously. Now, the way this is really basic knowledge. I'm going to explain it as basically as I can. The way you distill a whiskey, basically you just grab a pot still, you put malted barley basically in the distiller, like around 5%, 6% ABV. The alcohol rises, then you empty the still, then you put it back again, and then you distill it a second time, and that comes to like about 40-60%, and so on and so on. But it's an arduous process, it's a hard process. You have to clean the stills, you have to put the spirit back on, and so on and so on. Column distillations, on the other hand, or continuous stills, allows you to introduce basically continuous amount of malted barley basically into a column still. So imagine like a big massive still, the wort comes from the top, steam rises from the bottom, and because the steam is 100% ABV and alcohol distills at 96, basically strips all the alcohol away and takes it to another column distillation, another column on the other side, and this is called the rectifying, which takes the alcohol and just basically strips it even more. So these column distillations can distill alcohol to about 96.2%. Now, this produces a really light style of spirit, and this was created by a gentleman called Nikka Coffey in the 1830s, and then Nikka Coffey at the time basically sold the patent to everybody else, and it just changed the way we were making spirits. Basically, nowadays column distillation gets used for vodka, gin, rum, white rum, and so on, and as I said, produces a really light style of whiskey, and usually this whiskey or a spirit, neutral grain spirit, usually gets used for blends. It's the backbone of blends. So basically it's a white canvas in which you put 40-50% of grain whiskey, and then you put the other with being single malts that you can add different flavors, and it can actually create basically a flavor profile. Now in 2000, so the other interesting fact about this, and the reason why they started doing column distillation at the Nikka distillery, is because in Japan, information is not shared between distilleries. Not only information, but whiskey is not given to each distillery, unlike Scotland, where everybody shares everything. So in this way, if you want to create a blend in Japan, you have to create everything on site in your distillery. So that's why Yoichi Miyagiku has so many different flavor profiles to be able to create something like Taketsuru or different blends and so on. In the 2010, Nikka started experimenting on producing something that is called the coffee series. So we have reviewed already the coffee grain, and now we're talking about the coffee malt. The coffee grain was 100% corn, and that's why it's called coffee grain, and this is coffee malt. This is 100% malted barley. Malted barley to do a single malted barley grain, basically column distillation, is actually quite quite unique, because obviously you put the malted barley, and the malted barley, what it does is actually produce, when you do it on a pot still, produces a certain type of whiskey or a certain basically white spirit that has a lot of flavor, and then absorbs a lot of the wood and then adds to the flavor. When you do a coffee malt, basically you're stripping all that flavor away, and you would think that you will get left with a really light spirit. Now that is not the case in this particular whiskey. This whiskey is super complex and is actually delicious. You can still taste the malted barley, and if you compare this side by side with malt and grain, so the two different bottlings, you'll see the difference is huge. And even though both spirits will probably get distilled at like 80-90% ABV. So this one, it's aged 100% in American oak, the last bits of this bottle, and bottled at 45% ABV. As I said in previous videos as well, 45, between 44 to 45 ABV, 46 ABV is that perfect sweet spot, in which I personally think is not too strong, but it's not too weak. 40% ABV alcohol spirits or scotches for that matter, there's nothing wrong with them, but I prefer a little bit more higher ABV, which adds a little bit more flavor, and it carries through what the whiskey distillery really tries to show. And then, yeah, there it goes. You got the sweetness. There's a sweetness of like new make spirit. Like, you know, I'm not sure if you ever been to a distillery and you go to and you do the tour and they show you the new make and you try that new make spirit, that maltiness, that like malted bread, like new make spirit. It still gets the sweetness from the bourbon, but it's actually really complex, a really interesting whiskey to try. Yeah, that's the sweetness. It's literally like just almost like new make spirit. It has a really, really interesting aroma. There's vanilla notes, there's toffee, there's caramel. It has a really good palate weight as well. It's like kind of like almost like syrupy. It's a delicious whiskey. Definitely highly recommend it as not only as an experiment, but something to have at home, because it's actually unique. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Hopefully we'll see you next time, and Slàinte.